Hi, I'm Paige Ann Olson. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm going to start working on a quilt, and it's called Sweet Snow Along. And as you can see, it's applique blocks plus some pieced blocks. I think there are 9 pieced blocks. I'll show you how to make those. But I really want to show you how to make the applique blocks using the Scan and Cut, a program called Simply Applique, and then transferring that to my sewing machine so it will stitch out the blanket stitch. So I don't have to do that. The pattern came from Sentimental Stitches. I think it's an older pattern. I think it's been around a while. They recommend fabric called Snow Sweet. It's difficult to find the fabric. I did buy a fat quarter of the Snow Sweet fabric and a little bit of the yardage. I was able to get all of this on Etsy, but they don't have all of it available. So I'm gonna feather in some of the fabrics that I already have, and I bought some other stuff that I hope will work. The pattern, the way that the pattern works is it comes with, here are all the applique block designs. And so it comes with all of the, oops, help if I put this right side up like that. So what we're going to do is I'll show you how I'm going to take these and scan these into the Scan and Cut, and we'll cut out the fabric so it's a perfect cut. Now you can obviously use your light box and do this manually, draw around each image and then cut it out, and then take it to your sewing machine and do your stitching around it. I just thought it would be fun to show you how to use the Scan and Cut. I am not an expert with the Scan and Cut or Simply Applique. I'm learning how to use it, so y'all are gonna learn with me as I work this through. Hopefully it will make sense to you, and it will help you if you have a Scan and Cut, or if you are thinking about buying one. This might be a kind of a nice primer on learning how to use it, especially for simple appliques. Now it will work with much more complicated things than I have tried, but I thought it'd be fun. That's why I thought this would be such a fun one to do, because most of the applique pieces are really pretty simple. So I need to stop talking and let's get to it. The pattern comes with all of the images for the applique. This is the bell. This is the one I'm going to use today. And what we need to do first is scan this into the Scan and Cut. And that's the picture of the Scan and Cut. I'm going to make this a little bit larger. And I'm going to show you first. Here's my scanning mat, which is what you need to do the scanning with. And I'm going to put my bell in my scanning mat, and I'm going to insert my scanning mat into the Scan and Cut. And I'll bring you a little closer once it loads. And you see I have 2 options here, pattern and scan. Scan on the right. I'm going to hit scan. And we're going to scan to cut data, because that's what we ultimately want to do. Hit start, and it should scan this bell into the machine. Hopefully it won't take long, not even a minute. These images are already, I don't need to mirror image them. I believe that they are all ready to go. So I have unloaded my scanning mat, and now I'm ready to clean it up a little bit. One of the things that happens with the Scan and Cut is, if you can see, hopefully you can see the big box around the bell. We want to get rid of that and any lines that are in the image, because you don't want those, you don't want the machine to cut those out. So the first thing I'm going to do is, we have some options up here. I'm going to select this because I want it to cut the outside only of the bell. And I have a couple arrows, and I'm going to actually just move these arrows up, because this is how I'm going to get rid of the lines that are around the bell. And there's a little bit of printing up there, and I want to get rid of that as well. So I'm going to use these little arrows. Whoops. And try to get rid of that line. I think that looks pretty good. And I'm going to hit preview so I can see it. Hopefully you guys can see this. There's still a cross in the middle, but that's okay. We're going to take care of that in just a minute. I'm going to hit OK again. And it's going to ask me where I want to save it. I have a USB located on the side. I don't know if you can see it. It's right here. I have it located right to the side of my screen. So I'm going to select, the machine will save it to my USB, because I'm going to then take my USB and put it into my computer so that I can work on the Simply Applique program. But I'm not quite done cleaning it up yet. So it asked me if it says it's saved to the USB media. It gave me a file name, and the FCM stands for Fancy Cutting Machine. And I'm going to hit OK. And now we can go in and kind of work on it a little bit. So I'm going to hit OK to this. It's going to ask me again. I've already saved it. So I'm going to go home. It is okay to delete because I've already saved this. So I'm going to go into retrieve data. I'm going to go into my USB, which is where it's saved. And here is my image. And I want to click on it because I have a little bit more cleanup to do. So I'm going to hit the OK button, and see where it says edit right here? I'm going to hit edit. And right now there's a red box around the bell. So I don't want to, that will erase the entire bell. So I'm going to use these select buttons, and you probably can't see this, but there's a little bit of red right there, and that's what I'm going to delete. And I'm going to keep doing it until I get rid of this whole, the center crosshair is basically what this is. And so I'm going to get rid of all of the crosshair. And I think that's everything. So now we just have the image of the bell, and that's what we want. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to save it again to my USB. So now I'm going to overwrite it because I don't need a new one. I'm going to hit OK. Now we are ready to go ahead and put our fabric on our mat, and I will show you how that works in just 1 second. I'm going to hit OK. I'm getting it ready to cut. So I'm going to take you over to my other cutting surface and show you how to prepare the bell to be cut. So we now need to prepare our fabric to be cut by the scan and cut. I have already cut out my pieces. Here is the backing fabric cut to 8.5 by 8.5, which is the unfinished size of the block out of it's called Candy Makers fabric. And I have cut out a slightly smaller square, 8 by 8, of the bell fabric that we're going to use. And by the way, I used my 8.5 by 8.5 inch ruler for this, which worked perfectly. And I cut out a square, an 8.5 by 8.5 inch square of light heat and bond. And you can kind of see there's a kind of a bumpy, shiny side. That's the glue side. And then the back is just a paper side. So you're going to take the glue side and put it down over the back of your fabric. Let me show you a picture of what it looks like when you buy it at the store. It should look like this. Heat and bond light. I use that stuff all the time for applique, and cutting out on the scan and cut, it works really nicely. What I found is that the bell fabric when you put it over the background, you can really see through it like that. You can really see the background fabric. So I'm gonna try something. I have no idea if it's gonna work, but we're gonna try it. I cut out just a plain cotton white fabric, the same size as the bell fabric. And I'm going to cut these on the scan and cut and put them together. And I'm hoping that that will be able to make that work and have it not show through. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the back the white backing, and I'm going to put the heat and bond glue side down and iron it to the white backing, because I want to see if I can get this to cut all these layers. I need to trim that. But what in effect I'm going to do is once I trim this, I'm going to put adhesive, temporary adhesive spray on the back of my bell and attach it to the fabric with the adhesive in the back, just like that, and put this on my scan and cut with the idea that it should cut out the bell with 3 different thicknesses. So I'll have the bell fabric attached with adhesive spray to the white fabric, which will then have the heat and bond on the back of it. And that way, when it cuts out the bell, I can just place it right on my backing once I've done my placement stitch on the machine. So I'm gonna see if that's gonna work. I'll let you know. I have placed my fabric onto the fabric mat, and you can tell the fabric mat says it, but it also has a gold banner. That's how you know it's a fabric mat. And I have placed my fabric right side down, and my mat isn't real super sticky. So I used my roller, they call it a brayer, and I went ahead and pressed it, put some muscle into it, like that. And then I also used some Scotch tape and taped the corners down, because I want to make sure that as the needle turns, it won't pull up because it's such thick fabric. I'm concerned about that. The last thing I'm going to do is move my bell from the center of the scan and cut to the top left corner so I can cut it out correctly on the mat. So I'm going to load the mat, and then I'll be right back and show you how I move it and how it cuts. So I'm going to go ahead and load my mat, and to do that I hit that second button below the home button, and it automatically loads it. Now I'm going to try to bring you in a little closer so that you can see how I change the bell from the center of the screen to the top left hand. Hopefully you can see that. I know it's not great. So I'm going to hit the OK button, and I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to take my stylus, and this big box around the bell allows me, that means the whole bell is selected and allows me to move it. And all I have to do is just move it to that top left-hand corner. I hit OK. I hit OK again. And now we're ready to cut. I've selected cut. We have some other options, but I'm going to hit cut. It's processing. Now I'm going to start it, but I want to make sure you can see it. So I'm going to back out a little bit and see if you can actually see it cut. And hit start. So all it's doing now is it's just testing the thickness for the blade. It's not cutting yet. It's thick, I can tell. Okay, it's done cutting. I'm going to remove my mat, and I think it's going to be perfect. So here is our finished bell, and I still have the heat and bond on the back, and I'm going to leave it there, and I'll show you about that in just a minute. But it went through all the thicknesses, no problem, and I'm hoping that the white background against the bell will actually cover up the backing when I put it on top of that, and so that will make it look, I think, more professional. So it worked out great. All right, so I have taken my USB out of my Scan and Cut, and I have plugged it into my computer, and I have called up a program called Simply Applique. It is a standalone program, and I am going to now import the bell into the applique system. This is what's going to tell my embroidery machine how I want it stitched around the edge. So the first thing I need to do when I call this up, I have a new screen. I'm going to go to the hoop, which hopefully you can see this, and I'm going to select. I've actually already selected it, but to do that, you go to select hoop, and it's in millimeters, but it tells you right here in inches. So I've got my 8x8 hoop is what I want to use. So I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to go over to the little A at the top left corner, and I'm going to hit that, and I'm going to import from my fancy cutting machine this document, or this is the bell right here, and I'm going to open it, and there's my bell. So I'm going to try to move it into, well, heck if I can, move it into the middle of my hoop so that you can see that. Okay, so because this is just one image, we're not adding anything else, all I want to do is tell the system how I want this stitched out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Tools. I need to select it, and you do that when over to the left hand side, and when you go to Tools, it has this Convert to Applique right here. So I'm going to click on it. It defaults to a satin stitch, but I'm doing this quilt in blanket stitch, so I'm going to select blanket. Now notice it didn't change, and it won't change until you go down here and hit apply. But there's also, just so you know, there's also something called motif, and there's a number of different motifs. If I wanted, I could do something else bell-like. My dogs are barking. And I could go down here and I could do like this cute little decorative stitch, but I'm going to do a blanket stitch, and then you can do a plain run. You know, that's if you just want to do a stitch inside the raw edge of the applique. But I'm going to do a blanket stitch, and I'm going to apply here, and it is now ready for me to send it using my USB to the embroidery machine. So to do that, I've got to go down here, I've got to go to Save As, and I'm going to name this Bell. Oops, my dog's name is Bell. Well, if I could spell it would be helpful. And it gives me, I need to convert this to PES. So it gives me a bunch of options, and I have a Baby Lock Destiny, so which uses a PES format. So there's a Brother Baby Lock Bernina PES version 10. I'm going to click on that, and that's actually what's going to convert it to the PES format for my machine. And I'm going to hit save, and it is ready to go. All I have to do is unplug my USB and put it into my machine. I have placed my USB right here in my machine for the port that has a USB, and all I'm going to do is press my my button for USB, and it reads it. There's my image right there. I'm going to press on it, and I'm going to set it, and then I'm going to put it in memory, and that's that little pocket right there, so that I can go ahead and close my machine down. I can say okay to delete it. Yes, it's okay because it's saved. I'm going to show you, and then I go into embroidery. I go to my memory, and there is my bell. So it will be ready for me to stitch out in just a couple minutes. I'm now ready to hoop my fabric, and I'm going to use a stabilizer, and it's this stuff, Tear and Wash. I'm going to put it inside my 8x8 monster hoop, which is basically a huge magnet. It works really well for this, and all my blocks are 8.5 by 8.5, so it's going to be a perfect hoop to use. I have laid some paper out here so that when I spray the backing for the hoop, it won't get all over everything. So I'm going to lightly spray this. Well, lightly spray it. And then I'm going to place my backing for my block right in the middle, just like that. Now there's a couple of different things we can do. This is an 8.5 by 8.5. What I should have done is folded it in half so I could get my measurements. But what I can do instead is take out my little washable pen, and I can take a measurement in the middle. So it's 8.5. So I want to do 4.25 here, and 4.25 on this side. And that gives me my axis so that I can mark my center, because I want to place it in my hoop and center it so that when we put the placement stitch and the bell on there, it will be accurate. So I don't need this paper anymore. I'm going to attach this to my monster hoop and get it evenly lined up, and I'll take it over to the sewing machine and we'll do the placement stitch next. So it's time to load our machine, and I have my thread already selected. I'm doing let's see, the color is bright yellow. And so I'm going to load my hoop into my machine, just like that. And I'm going to get a little bit closer in a minute, but I wanted to show you over here, you can see my screen, and it tells me I have 3 stitches to complete this design. And the first one is a placement stitch, which I'm going to use. I'm going to skip the second one because that's a reinforcement stitch and it won't work on this. And then we have our third stitch, which will be our blanket stitch. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do our placement stitch, and I'm going to bring you in a little closer so you can see that. And hopefully you'll be able to see it. Since it's yellow thread, it may be a little difficult to see, but I'll show it to you when it's done. Now, when you're embroidering, the way that you do this is when I start, I let it take a couple of stitches, and then I stop, and you want to clip the tail. And then we're going to go ahead and just let it work. and it takes about a minute. My machine tells me how long each stitch is going to take, and this is going to take, I don't even think it takes a minute. One important thing about embroidery is to ensure before you get started that you have a full bobbin every time you do a new stitch out, because if you can change your bobbin thread in the middle of an embroidery stitch, but it's a pain, so you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. All right, so this part's done, the placement stitch is done, and so hopefully you can see the placement stitch. I can't hold this and do this with my hand at the same time. You can kind of see the yellow stitching around here. And it's got a picture of the bell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bell and take off the heat and bond. I'm taking it over to the iron, and I'm going to leave my hoop on, and I'm going to place this right on top of the fabric, on top of my ironing surface, and press this down. I'm not going to take it out of the hoop. You don't want to do that because it'll be all wonky and you'll never get it back in there correctly. And that's going to be important when we do the blanket stitch, because you want it exactly where the placement stitch was. So I have placed my embroidery hoop with my bell in the middle, or in between or inside the placement stitch. And now we're going to do the blanket stitch. I have my machine ready to go. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to start it, stop it after a couple of stitches, cut the tail off, and we're off to the races. And I'll show you what this looks like when it's done. And it looks like it's handling the double fabric just fine. You know, you can do this by hand, and obviously if you do applique by hand, there are stitches in the machine that will allow you to blanket stitch yourself, but it takes a long time to do that, number one, to do it accurately. And this just is a nice, really nice finished look, and it's better than what I can actually do, even though I've done a lot of applique stitching myself. I just like the way this looks so much better. And I haven't done a lot with the satin stitch, but one of these days I'm going to do some satin stitching too, and I think that will look a lot better than what I can do myself. And again, this stitch out is about a minute long. And I think it's going to look really good. Perfect. Take it out of the hoop, and there is our finished block. So all I need to do is take the block off of the out of the hoop, and our finished block will be done. I'll be making some more of the blocks for you. I'll show you some of the more complicated ones. I won't show you every single block in the quilt, how to do every single one, because some of them are simple and you already got the idea. I showed you how to do the first one. And I will also show you how I piece some of the pieced blocks in that quilt, and I'll even show you how to put it all together. And I'm anxious to get it done because it's an awfully cute quilt. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, leave comments. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm curious, what's under your needle?